trigger warning. What you're about to hear is absolutely ridiculous, and there's going to be some insane numbers being thrown your way. So try not to freak out while we go through some of the worst NHL contracts ever signed. ILYA KOVALCHUK, 15 years, $100 million with the New Jersey Devils. As the 2009-2010 trade deadline neared, the Devils GM at the time, Lou Lamoriello, was quick to trade for Kovalchuk after he turned down a 12-year, $101 million extension with the Atlanta Thrashers. Immediately fitting in with the roster, Kovalchuk finished that season on a point-per-game pace through 27 games. That point-per-game pace was enough for the Devils to want to negotiate a long-term contract with Kovalchuk, and when I say long-term, we're talking 17 years and $102 million, making that the longest contract in the history of the NHL. However, that deal only lasted 2 days before the league shut it down because it was in violation of the collective bargaining agreement. This deal had Kovalchuk slated to make $95 million over the first 10 years of the contract and the remaining 7 over the final 7 years, meaning Kovalchuk's contract had him signed to play through the 2026-2027 season where he'd be 44 years old. But because an arbitrator had ruled in the favor of the NHL's decision to disallow the contract, the Devils had to restructure the deal to 15 years and $100 million. Poor Kovalchuk. But that doesn't mean that the New Jersey Devils got away with trying to bend the rules on that first deal. The league announced in September of 2010 that the Devils were being fined $3 million and would forfeit 2 draft picks, a 2011 third rounder, as well as a first round pick from either 2011, 2012, 2013, or 2014. Okay, so that's out of the way. Kovalchuk inks 15 years for $100 million and everyone is happy. Well, you fast forward to 2013, just 3 years into the contract, and Kovalchuk announces his retirement. Really, dude? You still have 12 years and $77 million left to go. Kovalchuk retired from the NHL and made his way back home to Russia to play in the KHL. His contract was terminated, and Devils fans and the franchise were left looking like this.
What the
David Clarkson, 7 years, $36,750,000 with the Toronto Maple Leafs. In 2013, the Toronto Maple Leafs handed David Clarkson what turned out to be probably the biggest contract fail in Leafs history. Before we dive into that contract, let's backtrack to the 2012-2013 playoffs, where if you're a Leafs fan, you already know what happened.
On a shot here, score! Save, rebound, can score! Goes around with a high side and score! Chance in front, taking his there, puck comes free, score!
Right, so losing to the Bruins in that fashion was a hard pill to swallow for the Leafs. So what do they need to make sure they never lose like that again? How about someone who can be in your top 6, put up some points, and rough it up with the best of them? Yeah, that sounds like a perfect fit. And on paper, it seemed like it could really work out for Clarkson in Toronto. Also, just as a little side note here, the Edmonton Oilers actually offered Clarkson more money to sign with them, but being an Ontario native, Clarkson couldn't pass up the opportunity to play with the Buds. The Oilers really dodged a bullet there. In the previous seasons with the New Jersey Devils, Clarkson put up some impressive stats. 30 goals, 16 assists for a total of 46 points in the 2011-2012 season, and the Leafs were hoping that would carry over. So Clarkson signs the deal, and that takes us to preseason, where this happened.
He's going to get more penalty minutes than anyone else.
Here we go. Scott went after Kessel, and Kessel is given. Whoa, this has brought something on.
That's right. What you're looking at right there is a 10-game suspension for the Leafs' newest acquisition. And although he scored some brownie points stepping up for the team's superstar at the time, Phil Kessel, those 10 games missed really set Clarkson back as he had to sit out for the start of the season. This was unfortunately the first of many setbacks for Clarkson during his stay in Toronto. Clarkson went on to battle shoulder and elbow injuries, limiting the amount of games played with the team. He tallied up an underwhelming 15 goals in 118 games played. Ultimately, he ended up being traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets and unfortunately never really got back to playing at the level we've seen him reach before. Rick DiPietro, 15 years, $67,500,000 with the New York Islanders in 2006. If you speak of this contract to any hockey fan, other than an Islanders fan of course, you'll immediately hear laughter, as this contract could very well be the worst of the worst. Obviously, the franchise dished out this contract with hopes of securing a franchise goaltender who can take care of things between the pipes. The Islanders even drafted DiPietro first overall in the 2000 entry draft, hoping he will be the cornerstone of the franchise. But that's not what happened here. Islanders owner Charles Wang and the team's GM at the time, Garth Snow, thought they were locking up a top-tier prospect that would be the future of their team, like their very own Patrick Waugh. And even if that was the case, the term and the amount of money spent on DiPietro at this time made zero sense. DiPietro's career stats up until this point were 58, 62, and 13 with a 2.85 goals against average. How are those stats worthy of a 15-year contract? My own mom wouldn't even sign me for a contract like that. Okay, so his numbers could be worse, and hopefully it only gets better from here. But here is the problem. For a team to win, they need more than just a goalie. But with this insane contract given to DiPietro, the team had no room to bring in any other players that could make a difference. Making matters worse, since signing the contract, DiPietro struggled to remain healthy and was often found sitting on the IR. DiPietro would end up playing for the Islanders for 7 more seasons after signing the contract, but was only the starter for the first 2 years. After those 2 years, DiPietro only played 50 more games to wrap up his Islander career. In 2013, the Islanders eventually used a compliance buyout on DiPietro's contract and will still be paying him $1.5 million each season until 2029. Scott Gomez, 7 years, $51,500,000 with the New York Rangers and the Montreal Canadiens. The Montreal Canadiens traded for Gomez after the 2008-2009 season when they sent Chris Higgins, Ryan McDonough, and Pavel Valentenko to the New York Rangers. In return, they received Scott Gomez and Tom Pyatt. The Rangers had already paid Gomez $18 million in the previous 2 seasons. However, the Canadiens were now obligated to pay Gomez $33.5 million over the next 5 seasons. The salary cap at the time was only $56.8 million, which means Gomez's contract was taking up 13% of the Habs' total cap space. So, needless to say, they were expecting Gomez to perform at the highest of levels, and that just didn't happen. Gomez was coming off a season where he scored 16 goals and had 58 points. Now that's not bad at all, but when you're one of the highest paid players in the league, a high performance is expected at all times. In his first season with the Habs, Gomez basically matched his production from the previous years, notching 59 points in 78 games played. But in the second year with the Montreal Canadiens, well, that's where things became disastrous. Gomez scored 7 goals in 80 games, while playing top-line minutes, even playing on the power play. Wait, it gets worse. The following season, he had 11 points in 38 games, capping off an embarrassing stretch where he went more than a calendar year without scoring a goal. Eventually, Gomez was asked by GM Marc Bergevin to not attend training camp, which led to Gomez being bought out in the 2013 season. To make matters worse, Ryan McDonough, who the Canadiens gave up for Gomez, turned out to be a top pairing defender with the Rangers and then eventually made his way to Tampa Bay, where he won 2 Stanley Cups. Ilya Bryzgalov, 9 years, $51 million with the Philadelphia Flyers in 2011. With hopes of solving their goaltending problems, the Flyers signed Ilya Bryzgalov to a 9-year, $51 million deal. This contract would ultimately lead to the largest buyout in NHL history, where Bryzgalov receives $1.63 million per year, over twice the length of the remaining contract, which is 14 years. I know these are a lot of numbers, but keep up. This basically just means the Flyers are stuck paying him until 2027. So let's take a look at what happened. Before the Flyers could sign Bryzgalov, they had to trade captain Mike Richards and leading scorer Jeff Carter in order to clear up enough cap space. Now that's a bold move if I've ever seen one. Then after signing the deal, Bryzgalov's first season was so inconsistent at times, it was very difficult to watch. He had a 2.48 goals against average and a 909 save percentage. And while those numbers aren't terrible, to have your star goalie go on extreme hot and cold streaks presents a lot of problems for your team, especially just after inking such a huge deal. Every little mistake made is under a microscope, and believe me, there were many mistakes made. Now, in that first year, the Flyers did make the playoffs. However, Bryzgalov only played 40 more games for the Flyers as his game fell very flat. It got to the point where Bryzgalov just became a distraction, making enemies within the Flyers dressing room, getting into arguments with media, and basically becoming a punchline around the league. In the 2013 season, the Philadelphia Flyers bought ILYA Bryzgalov out of his contract, and as mentioned before, the Flyers are paying Bryzgalov until 2027. So until then, they owe him $1,642,857 every year. Thanks for watching our videos. Don't forget to hit that like button, and if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next video.